What do you know about Pokémon? From video games to cards to TV shows to movies, this series has single-handedly become the largest active media franchise to date. It's come very far from its roots, and maybe the concept of a multi-billion-dollar series is concerning. But one thing is certain, the Pokémon franchise has wriggled its way into millions of hearts around the globe. But that's not what I want to talk about today. Today, I want to focus on just one tiny aspect of this gigantic series, the catchphrase it began with in 1998. The central conceit of Pokémon, building a team of battle monsters to face other teams, is alluring. Whenever you began a new game, the amount of choice you had to build your team up was overwhelming. Different Pokémon had different specializations and weaknesses, different moves they could learn, and different new creatures they could eventually evolve into. For the role-playing video game genre that was at the time plagued by games consisting of 4 to 8 party members and no more, this was a massive innovation. The first Pokémon games released in the West, Red and Blue, had 151 different monsters to potentially collect and train. And when I got back into the franchise in 2021, I fell hook, line, and sinker into it, even more than when I was a kid. I was absolutely enamored with the idea of collecting every one of the now 1,008 Pokémon. Pokémon actually dropped the catchphrase from the box art and branding around 2003 with the release of the games Ruby and Sapphire, likely because the task of actually catching them all was growing to an immense workload, with 386 different monsters available at that point. Regardless of the branding, however, the game still continued to reward players with in-game diplomas and other incentives for catching all the available creatures. Another feature of the franchise critical for the process of collecting every monster was the fact that every Pokémon game, through some means, was able to transfer Pokémon forward to newer games. That means that I was able to start with Pokémon on the Game Boy Advance and Ruby and Sapphire, and transfer all the way to the newest games on the Nintendo Switch, Sword and Shield. To demonstrate, let's catch a Pokémon on the Game Boy Advance in Generation 3, meaning the games Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. How about this Zigzagoon? We'll call him Reggie. We then transfer him to Pokémon Platinum in Generation 4 through the PAL Park system, where we utilize the Nintendo DS Lite's 2 cartridge slots to access the data of both games at once. With Reggie in Generation 4, we can send him to Generation 5, Black and White, through the Poké Transfer Lab. Now we need to do another system change. To move Reggie from Generation 5 to the Nintendo 3DS, we use a program called Poké Transporter that moves him into an application called Pokémon Bank, which holds Pokémon to be used in games on the 3DS. Finally, from Pokémon Bank, we can transport him to the newest Pokémon collection service, Pokémon Home, where we can view and use him on the Nintendo Switch. With that, we've successfully moved a Pokémon from the Game Boy Advance all the way to the newest Pokémon games. From there, we would repeat the process with varying levels of difficulty around 800 times, then catch the remaining Pokémon in Sword and Shield. The question then is, why? Why do all this for hundreds of hours and hundreds of dollars, just for the purposes of having 1,000 digital monsters with essentially no worth? Creating this living dex, as most avid fans call it, reignited my interest in Pokémon as a franchise and allowed me to become invested in each and every one of these little guys. From the adorable axolotl-inspired Wooper, to the elegant, sleek designs of Gardevoir and Gallade, to the classic, cool design of Charizard, completing this challenge made me better appreciate my old favorites and find new ones along the way. My Living Dex quest also required me to play all of the games throughout the franchise, meaning that it introduced me to my favorite games in the franchise, Black and White, that I don't know if I'd play otherwise. It's certainly fun to say that you really did catch them all 20 years after the franchise itself decided that the goal was too lofty to promote further. But beyond the direct, tangible rewards, the sense of satisfaction and accomplishment I felt when finally seeing every Pokémon in its exact place was unmatched. I did that. Regardless of the literal value of the completed Living Dex, collecting things and completing that collection feels good. An ambitious goal made me a fan of a franchise I don't know I would be a fan of otherwise. I don't regret the many hours I spent on this project, and I don't think you would either. If you're thinking about creating your own Living Dex in this way, I highly recommend it. It takes a long time, a lot of effort, and a bit of investment, but the journey is worth far more than the destination.